Good morning, everybody. This is Debbie with John Burton Advocates for Youth. Welcome to our webinar this morning. It's just 10 o'clock right now, and looks like we have a few other people logging on. So I'm going to give it just a minute to give people a couple of minutes who are still hopping on the webinar, and we will get started in just a moment. All righty, good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. So this is Debbie Rasher with John Burton Advocates for Youth, and welcome to this morning's webinar on the 2018-2019 FAFSA Challenge. We're going to be talking today, so let me start with some logistical information. You can see on the slide here, most of you are probably logged on via your computers, but if for some reason there is any problem with the sound, there is call-in information. You can use your phone as well. And some of you may be hearing some kind of static clicking noise on the line. My apologies for that. We tried to figure out what that was to get rid of it, but we're unable to. So I think we're going to be stuck with some clicking as we go along. So I do apologize for that. Throughout the webinar, you can see on your control panel that there's a questions panel. You can submit your questions anytime by typing them into that box. For the most part, we will be doing all of the questions at the end. But if something pressing comes through, we can go ahead and try to answer during the webinar. But for the most part, we'll go ahead and do the questions during the Q&A at the very end. A recording of this webinar, as well as the PowerPoint, will be posted on our website, and we will also be sending that out to you after the webinar. I'll send you a link to that. And a PDF of the slides from today's webinar is also posted as a handout on your control panel. So you should see that there's a section on the GoToWebinar control panel called Handouts. It's one of 5, and if you click on that, you can download the handout right now with the PDF of these slides. I know sometimes people like to be able to print them out and follow along and take notes. So you can go ahead and do that right now if you want to be able to follow along with the slides as we go. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with some basic overview information. And one of the things I want to say, I know that there's probably a lot of you on the webinar this morning that participated in the FAFSA Challenge last year. There's probably some folks maybe who either didn't participate last year or are new in this role and are not as familiar with it. So I'm going to be focusing a lot on what's different this year from last year for those of you who did participate last year, but I'm also going to be providing some general overview information so that those who are new to this effort can have some context for what we're talking about. So some of this might be repetitive for those of you who did participate last year, but I promise there's also going to be some new information for you about what is going on this year and some of the new developments in the financial aid world. So first, we have this slide here that just shows financial aid really does make a difference. You know, why are we doing this at all? It may kind of seem obvious, but we always like to back up whatever we're doing with data and research as much as we possibly can. And so there was a study that was produced by TICAS just last year in 2017. And they found that students who receive at least $7,500 in financial aid had a 49% rate of either transferring or graduating. This was at the community college level, whereas students who received only between $1,000 and $2,500 transferred or graduated only at a rate of 17%. So really big difference there in rates of success based on whether or not the students were able to access the financial aid that was available to them. So, you know, when we looked at this data, it really made us realize this is the key. You know, having that financial aid in place is really a significant impactor of whether students ultimately end up being successful in college. And there's other research that is coming out that what we're seeing is that we're actually not doing a terrible job of enrolling students in college. The numbers are going up in terms of the number of students, foster youth that is, that successfully enroll in college, but we're not doing a good job of keeping them there. They're not completing, they're not succeeding, and so making sure that they have the financial aid in place is just really key to making sure that they make it all the way through and attain whatever their educational goals are. Next slide. So this is just some more data, another study, some additional data from that same study that I mentioned with the last slide in terms of the different types of financial aid. And so you can see that the highest success rate is among those who receive the Board of Governors fee waiver, which is now referred to as the Promise Grant, a Pell Grant, and CalGrant. 47% success rate when somebody receives all three of those sources. So again, you know, we're really trying to focus in on making sure that foster youth have access to everything that's available to them. And I'm going to talk more later as we move along about some strategies for doing that. Next slide. If we can go to the next slide. So this slide shows you that, you know, we know foster youth is what really makes a difference. And unfortunately, foster youth are not actually getting access to all the financial aid that they are eligible for. So data from the CalPass Plus system shows us that for last year, for 2016-17, that is the most recent year for which we have data, of first-time foster youth students entering a community college, 82% of them had a BOG fee waiver, Promise Grant, whereas, oops, if we can stay on that slide, thank you. Whereas only 50% of foster youth had a Pell Grant and only 13% had a CalGrant. And so if they qualify for the BOG fee waiver or the Promise Grant, they really should be getting a Pell Grant because the eligibility criteria in terms of income are the same. So we know that there's something going on here with getting that FAFSA completed, getting through the financial aid verification process and all of that, that is creating this gap. And for a full-time student, that's over $6,000 that they're missing out on. So that's many millions of dollars that's being left on the table that foster youth could be using to support their college careers. So next slide. So, of course, what are we doing about that? The Foster Youth FAFSA Challenge. Here we are. This is our second year doing it. What it is in a nutshell, for those of you that didn't participate last year, is county FYSCPs work with various partners, with students directly, with K-12 districts to track the number of foster youth who successfully complete a FAFSA and try to reach a goal that we have set at 60% of high school seniors in foster care completing the FAFSA. So last year's rate from the 17-18 challenge was 45%. So we did fall somewhat short of our 60% goal. So we're really hoping that we can see an increase this year, that it does go above 45% and just to move closer to the 60% goal. In terms of students overall across the state, there's a 58% rate of FAFSA completion. Of course, some of those students perhaps don't complete a FAFSA because they're higher income students and don't need the financial aid. But, you know, our hope is that with foster youth that they're basically matching the general student population in terms of the rate of FAFSA completion. So that is our goal for this year, that 60% of high school seniors in foster care complete the FAFSA. So next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's new this year, and then we'll go into kind of some of the procedural information. So what is new this year? What's different from this year from last year? First is that we're offering a new prize. So we're going to talk a little bit later about the prizes that we're going to be offering to the counties with the highest rates of FAFSA completion, as we did last year. But because we have data from last year, we can now offer a Most Improved award. So we're going to be providing that. So the county that has the biggest increase in percent. So even if you're in a county that you feel like it's not feasible for you necessarily to be the winner within your county category because of the unique challenges in your county to getting FAFSAs done, if you can show dramatic improvement from last year, even if you're not the highest, you can still win an award. The second change is that reports are going to be submitted online this year. So last year we had a spreadsheet that we asked you to fill out with the percentages, the percentage that of FAFSA completion. So that's all going to be online. I'm going to send you a link to a form to do that rather than using a spreadsheet. And we have updated materials that we're going to be talking about more later. So the financial aid guide is being updated, and we are working on doing a version in Spanish of a new poster we're really excited about, and some changes to the toolkit that we provided last year. Next slide. So some more information on what is new this year. So we are going to be asking folks to really move towards doing the verification of whether a FAFSA was completed through WebGrants. So for anybody who's new on the call, WebGrants is a system that you have access to that's managed by the California Student Commission, and it will show you, you can pull down lists by school that shows you students and whether they've completed a FAFSA or haven't completed a FAFSA, as well as whether or not their high school uploaded their GPA that's required to qualify for the CalGrant. So it really is the best and most accurate source of information about whether students completed the FAFSA or not. And so I'm going to talk more about this later. So we'll get into some details of that in a minute. We're going to have more emphasis this year on ensuring that the Chafee application and the GPA match is completed. We're not asking you to report on either of those two things, but we're just going to be kind of trying to provide some tools and working with you as individual counties to kind of focus in on that. Interestingly and somewhat depressingly, there was actually money that was unspent for Chafee grants this year. They didn't have enough students, and I suspect that there are students out there who would qualify that perhaps just didn't realize that they should submit the Chafee application. So we really want to make sure that every single student who submits a FAFSA also does a Chafee application. There's kind of I think there's a belief out there still from when there was less money in the pot that if you're a first-year student, it's really hard to get a Chafee grant, it's not worth applying, and that's completely untrue at this point, because we did get a budget increase to it a couple of years ago. So every single person that qualified for a Chafee grant this year who stayed enrolled in school actually got one. So we want to make sure that everybody is doing that. And then the GPA match, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, about some changes to the CalGrant and why that GPA match is so important. And then the bad news, and I'm so sorry to have to say this, but we're not doing student scholarships this year. So last year, in addition to the prizes to counties, we were able to award scholarships of $500 each to students. You gave us lists of students from your counties who completed the FAFSA, and we just were not able to raise enough funding this year to be able to continue to include those scholarships. So unfortunately, that's not going to be part of it. The good news is it'll make the reporting easier for you, because we're just going to be asking you for the number of FAFSAs completed and the number of foster youth and the percentage, rather than the anonymized lists of students that you sent us last year. But I am sorry that we're not able to offer that this year. Next slide. So another thing I want to share, and this isn't really specific to the FAFSA challenge itself, but is more kind of general information, that there is, as of October 1st, which is a couple days away, there's going to be a FAFSA phone app that is being released by the Department of Education. So if you go onto iTunes or Google Play, you can actually download the app now. It's a beta version right now that's on there. October 1st it's going to be updated with the new FAFSA. That's when the FAFSA, of course, comes out. So it'll have the 2019-2020 application, meaning, you know, the way that it's the application that you're filling out during the 18-19 school year for the 19-20 college year, basically. So it'll have that application. It'll have the IRS data retrieval tool functionality. Probably don't have a lot of students who filed taxes in 2017 that will need to download that from the IRS, but you may have some students who are working. And so that data retrieval functionality will be available through the app. You also, students will have an option to complete a renewal through the app in addition to a new FAFSA. They can make corrections through the app. They will have to get their FSA ID in order to use the app. And the application can be started on one device and completed on another with this thing called the save key that gets created when you start the application. So somebody can start it on their phone, and then maybe there's questions that they don't know how to answer, and then they sit down with a counselor in the office to finish it off or something like that, or vice versa. So this is really exciting for students that don't have easy access to a computer, that they will be able to do this now on their phone. Next slide. So the other kind of big picture financial aid information that I want to share is about changes to CalGrant eligibility. So we at John Burton Advocates for Youth did a bill this year to try to make the CalGrant more accessible to foster youth. So the CalGrant is pays a couple of different things. So if a student is going to a university, a four-year university, either a Cal State University, the University of California, or a private nonprofit university, it will pay tuition costs. At a CSU or UC, it essentially pays 100% of the tuition costs. At a private university, it'll pay a portion of the tuition costs. If a student is going to a community college, they have access to what's called the Access Grant, which is, I don't remember the exact amount, it's about $1,500. So this is $1,500 additional dollars that a student can have access to help pay for books, for housing, for transportation, for whatever the costs are. So typically, a student who's going to community college will have the fee waiver, the promise grant, so they won't be charged any tuition fees at the community college. And if they're attending full-time, or at least 12 units, they'll get the $6,000 Pell Grant, and then perhaps a $5,000 Chafee Grant. And then if they meet the qualifications for CalGrant, that's another $1,500 on top of it. So it's less than the Pell Grant and the Chafee Grant, but it's $1,500 is $1,500. It's, it's not a small amount of money for a student who's trying to make ends meet as they work their way through college. So we realized, you saw a slide a few slides ago, that only 13% of foster youth at the community colleges were getting a CalGrant. So we started to investigate why, and identified some of the barriers and did a bill to try to remove those barriers, and the bill was successful. So the California Student Aid Commission is still in the process of updating their systems to put this in place, but our expectation is that it will get put in place at some point during this school year. And so by the time the students you're working with are enrolling in college next year, this will be in place. And so we want to make sure that all of them who are eligible are getting access to this CalGrant. So there's a few changes made. The biggest one was the application window. Now you're working with high school seniors, so this isn't going to be quite as relevant to you, but right now, in order to qualify for an entitlement CalGrant, a student has to apply within 1 year of high school graduation, and if they miss that window, they're out of the entitlement opportunity. So for foster youth now, they can apply at any point up to age 26. So if they miss that window and they come back to school and want to apply, they can still get the CalGrant. Second is that it extends the maximum amount of time a foster youth can get the CalGrant from the current 4 years to up to 8 years of full-time status enrollment. And this is actually very relevant for you all, because one of the things that we had heard was that sometimes students who were entering a community college were actually counseled to not take the CalGrant, because the thinking was that if they ultimately transfer to a university, that the CalGrant is worth a lot more once they get to university, because it's paying the full tuition costs. And so if they use up their 4 years at community college getting this $1,500 a year, after 4 years, they get to a university and they don't have any CalGrant left. So now foster youth can get the CalGrant for 8 years. So it really takes away that disincentive. So we're strongly encouraging everybody should go ahead and take the CalGrant if they get awarded, should make sure that they meet the deadlines and all of that to be able to get the CalGrant, because there's really no downside at this point. It doesn't eat into the eligibility that's going to be needed for when they transfer to a university. And then the last one, and this is really the most relevant to you all on the call, is that the application deadline for foster youth for the entitlement application was extended from March 2nd to September 2nd. So, I'm sure you're aware that we've always pushed really hard for everybody, get your FAFSA done by March 2nd, March 2nd, March 2nd. Because if you miss March 2nd deadline, you're out of luck on the CalGrant. You can't get the entitlement CalGrants. And there's a very small number of what's called competitive CalGrants, but I'm going to not get into that because it's a really, really small number of students who get those. Whereas the entitlement, if you meet the criteria, you get it. And part of the criteria has always been March 2nd. And we discovered from the Student Aid Commission that 40% of foster youth were submitting their FAFSA after March 2nd. So really big number of foster youth were losing out simply based on that deadline. So it's now September 2nd for foster youth. So we still really encourage folks to get their FAFSAs in early because there are other forms of financial aid that are on a first come, first served basis. The Chafee grant, for example, it's a little more complicated than that, how it's awarded, but part of the awarding priority is that the sooner you get your FAFSA in, the higher up on the list you are for the Chafee grant. So there's still a lot of value to getting the FAFSA in as early as possible. However, it doesn't completely disqualify somebody from a CalGrant now if they miss that March 2nd deadline. So we're really excited about that and thrilled that we were able to get that through, and wanted to make sure that you're aware of it so that as you come across students after March 2nd, you know that doing the FAFSA was always still worthwhile because they can still get the Pell Grant, the Chafee Grant, but now they can get the CalGrant as well. And put a little note there on the bottom of the slide that I'll just note is that in order to qualify for the CalGrant, their GPA does still have to be submitted by their high school, and it has to be matched to their FAFSA. And so we're going to be doing some future webinars. I'm not going to get into a ton of information about this whole GPA matching process, but just to note that this is information that's available on WebGrants, and so it's even more crucial now that in addition to looking to make sure that a FAFSA was done, that you see whether the GPA was matched and that you assist the student to do whatever advocacy is necessary to get that GPA in there if it's not matched. And we know with foster youth, because of all the school moves and everything, there's still a lot of challenges sometimes with getting that GPA matched up to the right FAFSA. So again, we're going to be talking about that more in the future, but I just wanted to note it for now. Next slide. So with this, I'm going to actually transition over to Carolyn, who's going to talk to you about some of the other things happening this year. Carolyn?
All right. Thanks, Debbie. So we're going to give out awards similar to last year's challenge. So 4 counties with the highest rates of FAFSA completion will be awarded unrestricted funds to support foster youth post-secondary educational achievement. So 500 for the very small and small county winners, and then 1,000 to the medium and large county winners. Like we said earlier, unfortunately, we won't be doing student scholarships this year, but if winners would like to use their awards to provide scholarships to their students, we can work with you to cut the checks directly to the students if that's a preference. And then we also have that new award of $500 for the county with the most improved FAFSA completion rate reported to us from the previous FAFSA challenge. There will be 2 sets of awards, so counties will have 2 chances to win. One for the highest completion rate as of the March 2nd priority deadline, and that report needs to be submitted by March 18th. And then one set for the highest completion rates as of the March 31st deadline, and that report needs to be submitted by June 15th. And you'll see the pictures there are from the Ed Summit this past April, where we announced and recognized the winners based off the March 2nd completion rates. We'll be doing that again this year with hopefully the big fat checks in hand again. June winners were and will be again highlighted in local and statewide media and honored during JBA's annual Burn Book Fund event in Sacramento. So how can you participate in this year's county or FAFSA challenge? FYSCPs can register with JBA by November 15th. The registration link can be found on the FAFSA challenge webpage. The link is on the slide there. We'll also send it out to all attendees after the webinar. On the registration form, you'll provide the FYSCP point person who will be JBA's primary contact for the challenge, along with the number of high school seniors in foster care in your county for the 2018 and 2019 academic year, which can be obtained through CalPads, Foster Focus, or maybe another system that your county uses. We know this number will change over the academic year, so it really is just to give us a rough estimate and an idea of where high school seniors are this year. Once you're all registered, you'll work with partners to promote FAFSA completion. You'll track all foster youth seniors in your county who complete FAFSA through WebGrants up until the close of the challenge, which is May 31st. And then you will report on your completion rates 3 times throughout the campaign, which I'll discuss a little bit later. Now, it's not expected that FYSCPs sit down with each individual student to complete their FAFSA, but sort of be the central entity that collaborates and mobilizes other local partners like CASAs or ILPs, colleges, and such to facilitate FAFSA completion. So the great thing about WebGrants is that FAFSA completion will be tracked whether you sit down with the student yourself or a high school counselor helps them complete it or they do it on their own. It all counts towards your county's FAFSA completion. And so later I'll just be discussing the FAFSA Challenge Toolkit, which includes recommendations on how to collaborate with local partners and leverage resources to reach the most seniors in your high school or in your county. Like I mentioned earlier, you'll report on your FAFSA completion rates 3 times during the campaign. These are the dates, so December 12th, March 18th, and June 15th. While the December 12th reporting doesn't correlate with any awarding, it is beneficial for both the JBA and FYSPs. It's helpful for us to see where counties are in their efforts and where we should direct our technical assistance to, and it also helps encourage FYSPs to set up and fine-tune their process for tracking FAFSA completion early on. March 18th is the deadline to report your FAFSA completion rate as of the March 2nd priority deadline, which will indicate the first set of winners, and then June 15th is the deadline to report the completion rate as of the March 31st deadline, which will indicate the second set of winners. And now I hand it back to Debbie.
Great, thank you. And I think you meant to say, you said March 31st, I think you meant to say May 31st for the last deadline. So a couple of things that I realized that I forgot to say that I just want to mention before I move on. When I was talking about the March 2nd deadline being moved to September 2nd for the CalGrant, I should have clarified that that is for community college students only. Now we know that about 85% of foster youth who are enrolled in college are at the community colleges, so that's a lot of them. But if you do have a student who is applying for admission to a CSU or a UC or a private university, the March 2nd deadline still is in place for them. So I just want to clarify that. And I realized I just had Carolyn present some slides, and I don't think I actually introduced her, told you all who she was. So many of you probably know Deborah Pruitt, who led the efforts of the FAFSA Challenge last year. So Deborah is going to be continuing to be the point person on the FAFSA challenge. However, she is out on leave right now, so she had to take a leave of absence to care for an ill family member. So she's been out for a few weeks and is going to be out for a couple more weeks, and will be back though sometime in November. So Deborah will be back, but in the interim, my colleague Carolyn, who also works at JBay, has stepped in to provide a lot of support for the FAFSA challenge, and she's going to be the point person for questions in the interim until Deborah returns. So thank you very much to Carolyn for that, and you'll be hearing from her a little bit more later on. So probably should have done that introduction before she started talking, but better late than never. So tracking entries and exits. So there's two options basically for tracking who your foster youth are. So when it comes time to do reporting, there's two components to how you figure out the percentage, right? So there's the total number of foster youth who have gone to school in your county who are high school seniors. And then there's the number of those who completed the FAFSA. And you take the number who completed the FAFSA and divide it by the number the total number, and that's how you get your percentage. However, as you all know, I think it's not as straightforward as that, because foster youth come in and they come out. They come into your county and come out of your county. They come into foster care and come out of foster care. And so calculating that, the denominator, essentially the bottom part of the equation, the total number of foster youth, gets a little bit more complicated. So there's two options for this. One is if you are a county that uses Foster Focus, then you can just get this list through Foster Focus. And Kathy White from Foster Focus is joining us on this webinar, and she's going to talk in a minute about the Foster Focus piece. I won't get into that right now. So what I'm going to talk about on this slide is for those of you who do not use Foster Focus. If you do not use Foster Focus, then you have to do a somewhat manual process to be able to keep track of foster youth as they come into your county and come out of your county, or come into foster care and come out of foster care. So we have created kind of a template spreadsheet that we're going to be sending out to you that you can use to do this. And those of you who participated last year should be familiar with this. It's basically the same protocol that we used last year. So you can see there that we've got this list of students, right? And so the first five, where the bracket just showed up on your screen, those are the students who were saying were in your county on the first time you pulled your 5.7 report to get the list. So Don Doe and Mary Johnson and Pedro Gonzalez and Tamisha Williams and Michelle Smith all have a start date there of 9/4/18, meaning they were on your list, on your 5.7 list, when you pulled it 9/4/18. Now the next three, Joseph Washington, Cindy Chen, and Xavier Brown, you can see have start dates that are later. So as students come in to your county, as new students appear on your 5.7 report, you need to start adding them to the list. So on November 4th, when you pulled your 5.7 report, you saw, oh, Joseph Washington is now on my list. He wasn't there previously. I need to add him to my spreadsheet. So you add him to your spreadsheet with the start date. And we know, the start date might not be the exact start date. It might be the date that you're pulling the 5.7 report, but you get the basic idea. You also need to track who is leaving your county. So we have a column for exit date. The reason for this is because the rules that we have set up is basically that we're asking that you count a student in your report if they were enrolled in school in your county for at least 30 days. If somebody was not enrolled in your county for at least 30 days, it's probably not that realistic that you got a chance to try to get a FAFSA done for them. And so we're saying, you can go ahead and exclude that student from your list. So as a student leaves, you record an exit date. Of course, some students are going to stay the whole year, so some of these are blank, but Tamisha Williams left January 15th, 2019. She would still be included because she was in your county for at least 30 days. Joseph Washington, however, you can see came in on November 4th and left on November 27th. And so you can see there the red circle that just popped up. For this column, include and count, you're saying, no, I'm not going to include him in my count because he wasn't in my county for at least 30 days. So the next thing I want to point out is we have this column for FAFSA completed. And this is where you record, yes, a FAFSA was completed, or no, it wasn't. So as you're looking these students up in WebGrants, every time you see the FAFSA was done, you put yes. And once you put yes, you don't have to worry about that student anymore. You don't have to look them up ever again. The FAFSA was done. You're good to go, assuming there's no flags on WebGrants indicating that there was a problem. And then the last three columns are new columns that we created for you to track whether the student created a WebGrants account, whether a CHAFE application was submitted, and whether the GPA was verified. Now, we're not asking you to report on any of these. These three columns have been added to the spreadsheet as a tool to help you to be able to track this information, because we think these three activities are just really crucial in terms of making sure that the student has maximum financial aid. Of these three things, the only one of these that you are going to be able to tell from looking at WebGrants is whether the GPA was verified. The other two, whether a WebGrants account was created and a CHAFE was submitted, is information you would have to collect manually. So again, we're not asking you to report this, but it's just a tool for you. And somebody just sent a question in about the beeping noise that's on the webinar. So again, I said this at the beginning, and I do apologize. Yes, there was like some kind of static or beeping on the webinar. We tried to get rid of it before the webinar started and couldn't figure it out. So I know it's really, really annoying. And all I can do is apologize for it. At this point, I don't think I'm going to be able to figure out how to get rid of it. So with this spreadsheet that you see here, in terms of what would somebody be reporting who is using this spreadsheet, well, you can see that of the 8 students listed, 7 of them are going to be included in the count because Joseph Washington was there less than 30 days, so we're taking him out. So our denominator, the bottom half of our equation, is 7 students total. Of those 7 students total, 5 completed a FAFSA. Now again, we're not counting Joseph Washington. So Joseph Washington is showing up as having completed a FAFSA. Maybe he did it in some other county, but because he wasn't in our county for 30 days, we're excluding him entirely from both counts. So we've got 5 FAFSAs completed out of 7 total students for a percentage of 71%. I will say that we realize that this isn't a perfect system and could result in double counting. If a student does a FAFSA and they were in one county for 4.5 months and a different county for 4.5 months, are going to show up on both reports. But we didn't want to make it even more complicated. And it would get quite complicated if we tried to figure out when the FAFSA was done and all of that. It just wasn't really feasible. So we understand this isn't 100% perfect, but we think it's pretty close, pretty accurate way of figuring out essentially what your FAFSA completion percentage is for the purposes of reporting. And with that, I'm going to transition it over to Kathy White, who's going to talk about, for those of you who are on Foster Focus, how that's going to work this year.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. We can just rest on this slide for a minute. I just wanted to preface this with last year, Sacramento County created tools in Foster Focus to help users track student transition from high school to college and career. And with JB's announcement of the FAFSA challenge, we were able to expand the scope of those tools to support county participation in the challenge. So we collected feedback over the summer and made some improvements to the tools. And we also made some changes that'll just keep us aligned with the policies and procedures document for the FAFSA challenge this year. So we'll look at some of those now. So now we can go to the next slide. So we track student progress in Foster Focus using the grad transition tool. The grad tracker tab is the one that's showing here in this little screenshot. And this is where users can track student progress toward graduation, along with some general information about the student's plans for after high school. I have that second tab highlighted, IDs and documents, and that just lets users track whether students have the key IDs and documents in place that they're going to need when they launch. We're going to look at the Higher Ed Checklist tab next, so I'll just save that for now. But finally, we added a new tab over the summer for scholarships and incentives so that users can keep track of other sources of support that students are working toward. And districts can use these tools in the ways that best fit their program. So they're not all going to use all the tabs. It really is based on the level of support that they're providing in their program to their students. So let's dive into the Higher Ed Checklist. That's on the next slide. So here's the Higher Ed Checklist tab, and I can only show you a small part of it. This is where users view and update checklists of typical tasks that have to be completed for students to successfully transition to either a community or a four-year college. And this slide shows the data entry form, it's on the bottom, that FYS staff use to keep track of completed items. So if you've seen this screen before, you'll notice that now we have a new due date field in addition to the completed date, which we've always had. But the due date field supports a new principal to-do list, which is what is showing with that arrow pointing to it. Users can now click on printable to-do list to print out a list of what's been done, what still needs to be done, and that's for foster parents and students to take with them to help them keep track of everything that they need to do. And it includes items in the Higher Ed Checklist and the Scholarships and Incentives tabs. So one of those tasks, of course, is completing the FAFSA. And this checklist item that you see here is the source of the calculations Foster Focus performs when it is creating all those numbers for you for FAFSA challenge reporting on the other end. So counties that want to use the Foster Focus tools to manage their FAFSA challenge efforts will either use WebGrants at the county level to find their FAFSA completions and enter them into Foster Focus, or they might work with their district so that each district is entering this information for their students. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So Foster Focus is making it easy for COEs to build their countywide FAFSA challenge population, monitor the FAFSA completions at the county, the district level, or you can even go down to the caseload if you want to. And of course, to send those county-wide reports to JBA at those 3 report deadlines. So next slide. There are some things that you need to have in place if you do want to use the Foster Focus tools. You have to have your automated CWS CMS imports, and most of our counties have that already. So if you have that question, you can ask if you already have it. You also have to make sure that your enrollments are up to date, and most counties are doing that by uploading their CalPADS reports, and we recommend that that's uploaded weekly, just to make sure that we're getting all the kids that are coming in and making sure that they're getting on the FAFSA challenge list. And you also have to use the tools by entering the completion dates under the graduation transition tool to keep track of what students have completed their FAFSA. So once you have all those 3 pieces of information, then you're able to take advantage of all of the tools. So next slide. This year, the setup and tracking process is even easier. And I myself manage Sacramento County's population, which I like to do so I can get a feel for what it's like for all of you to have to use the tools. So I made some changes to make it much easier this year. Counties will still have to contact me if they're going to use these tools for the very first time. And once I've set you up within our system, you can use the County Financial Aid Checklist Report, which is the 1010R, to see all of your 12th graders that are currently enrolled in your county. And you can add them to your FAFSA Challenge group all on one page. You no longer have to go into an individual student's record and mark them one by one. It's all done on the report. It's much easier, just a lot of clicking. So once you build your initial population, you come back to that same 1010R report. And I recommend that counties do this every week. If you have a smaller population, you might not need to, but I know for Sacramento, weekly is what I do. And I come in and I look for students that I need to add, but I'm also monitoring to see how the data entry is going on FAFSA completions. So again, uploading that CalPADS 5.7 report every week is really important to make sure that we know who's coming into the county. So Foster Focus calculates for you what students should be included in the JBay count and which shouldn't, based on the information that we have in Foster Focus. So all of the columns that you were shown about entry and exit dates, that's all done for you. We make sure that 30-day limit is hit, and all that stuff will just be spit out for you. You click a link and you get your reporting results to put into the JBay forms without having to do any real legwork. So this should make your job a whole lot easier. So final slide is really just contact information. So if you have questions about the tools and how to use them, you want to get set up, definitely just please call or email me. And if I'm not around, Bridget, of course, is always a good resource. But I'm here and I'm ready to help you use the tools. So thanks for your time.
Great, thank you so much, Kathy. And I just want to apologize again for the beeping, which I realize is just excruciating. So appreciate everybody's patience with some of the technological challenges. But super big thank you to Kathy, work she's done to make Foster Focus just such a valuable tool in the FAFSA challenge process. We really, really appreciate it, as I'm sure all of you who use Foster Focus do as well. So thank you for that. So next I want to talk about some of the materials. All of the materials that we are producing will continue to be available on our FAFSA challenge page on the JBay website, and the link is listed there. And again, we'll send you in the follow-up email the link to all of this. And Carolyn's going to talk a little bit more about what we've got, but we've got updates to the financial aid guide, both in English and Spanish. We'll have our visual FAFSA guide, which is screenshot by screenshot of the FAFSA. We're updating the toolkit. We've got new procedural guides and a new poster. And I'm going to turn over to Carolyn in a couple minutes to share a little bit more about that. But before we get into the kind of the fun stuff, like the posters and stickers and all that, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm going to talk about the tracking process for FAFSA completion. So I think many of you on the call did this last year, used WebGrants, but some of you might be new to this. So as I mentioned before, we are asking counties this year to use WebGrants to verify rather than relying on some other source of information. Now, I think almost all the counties, with the exceptions of like maybe 2 or 3, do have WebGrants accounts. So I'm not anticipating this is going to be a big problem for anybody. If you're one of the 2 or 3 counties that has chosen to not get a WebGrants account for some reason, you can get the information from your local districts or schools as long as they have verified the information through WebGrants. Because again, if it doesn't show up in WebGrants, then that means CSAC doesn't know about it. So, we want to make sure that there wasn't some glitch, the person forgot to hit submit, or there was an error and it didn't go through, or, once it shows up on WebGrants, that's when we all really know we're good to go. It's there. So that's why we're really kind of pushing for this use of WebGrants. Now, there are going to be some circumstances where a school is not in WebGrants. Sometimes if a school is not accredited or a non-public school, they're not in WebGrants. So in those very rare circumstances, we understand that you might need to rely on looking at the FAFSA submission confirmation page or the student aid report to verify, but we're hoping that that will be only a very small number and that the vast majority can be verified through WebGrants. I want to say, just in terms of WebGrants, we've talked to CSAC about exactly the timing of this, and so FAFSA status is updated within 5 to 7 days. of submission of the FAFSA. So if a student is saying that they submitted their FAFSA 2 weeks ago and you are not seeing it in WebGrants, it's a problem. Something went wrong. It's very unlikely that it's just a delay for that long. Usually within 7 days, if you're not seeing it in there, it means that there's some issue. If they're completing a DREAM Act application instead for undocumented students, those are actually updated real time. So you should see those pretty much the next day. And if it's not in there, then again, it means there was some kind of problem. For the GPA matches that come in from the high schools, when the high schools upload the student's GPA to match it to the FAFSA for the purposes of verifying eligibility from a CalGrant, that happens weekly as that information is uploaded. The other advantage with using WebGrants, again, is that in addition to knowing for sure that it was done, it does have this field for what's called the no EFC flag, which means that there was no estimated family contribution calculated, which means there was an error. So it's a great way for you to be able to see whether or not there was an error in the FAFSA. And it also tells you whether it was matched to a GPA. As I mentioned before, sometimes there's a fair amount of work that has to be done to make sure the GPA match happens because of all the school mobility. So on the FAFSA Challenge webpage, we do have our WebGrants guide available. We did make some updates to it from last year, although it's largely the same. It has information about how exactly you get your WebGrants account. So if you don't have your WebGrants account yet, you can use the guide to figure out that process. And then it walks you through step by step exactly how you download and use the reports that are available. So next slide, I wanted to share some updates specific to WebGrants. We have been working with the Student Aid Commission to create a district level report. So this is not available yet, but I'm hoping that sometime soon in the next couple of months, this will happen. So right now, as those of you who used WebGrants last year know, you can only download a report by school. And so for those of you in larger counties with lots of high schools, it can be pretty cumbersome to download separate individual reports for each school. So what they're working on is a report that you can download for each district to make it a little bit easier. It's not ideal still, but it's hopefully will make it a little bit easier that you can just download reports by district instead of just by school. Now, I will say for those of you who haven't been on these before, CSAC is working on a whole new WebGrants system. The existing system is literally on its last legs. It's been around for decades. It's really just dinosaur of a system, which those of you who have used it, I'm sure, are aware. So they have gotten the funding from the state to completely create a whole new system, which is supposed to be done in the next couple of years. And it's going to be a lot more flexible. You'll be able to look up students by name, or SSID to see, did this student do a FAFSA? There's going to be, different queries. It's going to be a lot more flexible and versatile. So there is kind of a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of using WebGrants, but for this year, we're still using the same kind of old system, but hopefully we'll have this new district tool. Another change is that the reports in the past have listed the last 4 digits of the Social Security number where that's known. You're not going to see that anymore. They've removed Social Security numbers entirely from the reports, and they're using the SSID instead. I want to just mention that when you're working with students or talking with your districts about working with students to do the FAFSA, to remind them to make sure that when they're indicating their high school on the FAFSA to use the drop-down menu and make sure that they're picking the correct high school off that menu, because that's what allows it to match correctly to the GPA. If they manually type in a name that doesn't correspond exactly to that drop-down menu in the FAFSA, then their GPA is not going to match properly. So just a reminder about that. And the JBay team is available to help you troubleshoot any WebGrants issues. For now, this is going to be me until Deborah comes back, and then it'll be me and Deborah. So if you have WebGrants issues, definitely reach out to us, and we will help you troubleshoot them. There's also in the WebGrants manual at the end, there's all of the help desk numbers for CSAC. And so you can definitely call CSAC directly. And a lot of times that might be what we have you do because we can't get into WebGrants ourselves. So a lot of times the CSAC folks can be helpful. Next slide. So continuing on the theme of WebGrants, I wanted to mention that for those of you who got your account last year, and even for those of you who get it this year, you do have to renew your WebGrants account every 2 years. So you don't need to worry about it yet, but come this time next year, you'll be at the point where your account will most likely be expiring and will need to be renewed. And CSAC does not send reminders. They do not send anything to you to let you know that your account is expiring. So you may want to create some system for yourself to make sure that you remember 2 years from the date that you got your account last year that you do your renewal. Unfortunately, you do have to resubmit the whole form. So hopefully you have your form from the first time you did it with all the list of all the school names and codes, because you'll have to resubmit that same list with the same codes. If you don't have to redo it, if you have it from last year, you just use that same list. And you do need to get the superintendent's signature on that form. So you probably want to plan pretty well in advance to get that form filled out so that you give yourself enough time to get the signature and all of that so that there's no lapse in your account access. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Carolyn, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the resources that are available this year.
Thanks. So we have several resources available to help you with your FAFSA Challenge efforts. There's free promotional materials. We have a FAFSA Challenge Toolkit. We will be available in providing technical assistance. And we have our financial aid guide for California foster youth, which will be available in Spanish. So just going briefly over the resources, we have the financial aid guide, which really is a super helpful and useful resource that walks you step by step on how to fill out the FAFSA if you're foster youth. It is specifically tailored to foster youth in a way that you won't get the sort of information from general FAFSA completion tools. Right now, it's currently being updated with some minor changes, but the updated version will be available at the end of October. And like I said, it will be available in Spanish, which we're really excited about. And so you'll be able to get the electronic version from the FAFSA Challenge webpage, and print versions are going to be available for participating FYSPs through an order form that you'll receive after you register for the FAFSA Challenge. Next, we have the online visual financial aid guide, which is a screenshot by screenshot walkthrough of what a foster youth student would see and tips on what to select or do as they complete the form. This is currently also being updated as the Department of Education has made some minor changes to the interface, and so that will be available mid-October. Next, we have the FAFSA Challenge Toolkit. This is the resource I mentioned earlier on that really is a compilation of all sorts of things to help you with your FAFSA Challenge efforts. So there's strategies and recommendations on how to partner with local entities and how to organize FAFSA Challenge completion events and to maximize youth engagement and other tips and resources. Something new that wasn't in the toolkit last year is a section on IRS verification of non-filing letter. I won't focus too much on this during the webinar, but any students who have not filed taxes for the requested year, so if it's they're filing FAFSA for academic year 19 to 20, the requested tax form will be 2017. So those who didn't file taxes that year will need to get this letter. And so now there's a section in that toolkit that details how to go about getting that. Also new is the option for students without diploma section. So while their financial aid may be limited, it's not nothing. And so we added in a section about this opportunity that exists so that those that fit in this category can access financial aid. And finally, we have these awesome posters and stickers that will be available for participating counties. The first poster is the same as last year's. We heard it was a hit. And so we also have a new poster available, as you'll see here. Electronic versions can be found on the FAFSA Challenge webpage. And then the print versions, again, will be available and can be ordered through the order form you'll receive after you register for the challenge. And stickers will also be automatically sent to counties who submit an order form. And so we have that. And then lastly, we will be hosting 2 FAFSA refresher webinars on Thursday, October 25th, one specific to foster youth at 10 a.m. and then the other specific to homeless youth at 1 p.m. So after this webinar, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with all the relevant information, including registration links to these FAFSA refreshers. Stay tuned. And back to Debbie.
Great, thank you so much. So again, if you have questions, you can go ahead and send them through the question panel. And I did put Carolyn's contact information there on the slide. I probably should have put mine as well, although I think most of you probably get emails from me. So you probably have mine, but it's basically Debbie, D-E-B-B-I-E, @jbay.org. But, you know, most of the questions you can send through Carolyn. If there's stuff about WebGrants specifically, I'll be the point person on that, but everything else will be going through Carolyn. So we did have a few questions come in. So one, where did you say we can get the financial aid guide? I think Carolyn just addressed that a second ago, but I'll just repeat it. So once you sign up for the challenge, so we're going to be sending you a link to sign up for the challenge. To sign up, it's very simple. We're just asking you for the name of the contact person and how many foster youth are high school seniors right now. Just whatever is on your current 5.7 report. Once you sign up for the challenge, you will then get a link to an order form to request financial aid guides and posters and the stickers, which will just send you automatically with the rest of your request. So we are only able to make these resources available in hard copy for free to those who are participating in the FAFSA challenge. So you do have to sign up before you can access the order form. Now, of course, they're all available online for free. So on the FAFSA challenge webpage, everything will be posted. The financial aid guide, we're making some tweaks to it that we can't make until October 1st because that's when the new FAFSA comes out, and we just want to make sure that there's no changes happening that we don't know about before we do that. So that's why there's going to be a little bit of a delay on that. So towards the end of October, we will have the updated financial aid guide. There haven't been major substantive changes to the FAFSA, but there's just a few little tweaks here and there that we're going to be making. Let's see, so the next question is, will the refresher courses be appropriate for us to send to counselors at high schools? Yes, absolutely. You know, these are really designed for professionals who are working with students who are in high school to complete the FAFSA, including students who are homeless and students who are in foster care. It's going to be a step-by-step walking through, you know, here's what you need to know about foster youth. When you get to the screen that asks how many members are in your household, you know, do you count your foster parents or not? And, you know, all those kind of unique situations for foster youth, and then similarly the unique situations for homeless youth to make sure people really understand all the details of how to do that. So absolutely forward it along to your high school counselors. They'll get a lot of information, not just about foster youth and homeless youth, but about kind of filling out the FAFSA in general as well if they want that refresher course. One other thing I just want to say, and if anybody has any other questions, feel free to continue to send them. It's just that we do plan to do webinars over the next few months. So we're going to be honing in on some of these topics that we talked about, as well as calling on some of you who participated in the challenge last year to share some of your best practices, because we've really focused here on the logistics of the challenge. We didn't have time today to get into the outreach strategies and how do you get your percentage up and how do you get more FAFSAs done. So we're going to be doing a lot more webinars on that kind of thing moving forward. This was really the the logistical webinar. So let's see, I have a question. We only have access to our county-operated schools, not the whole county. Is that common, and what do I say to request access to the entire county? So you should be able to get access for all the schools in your county, and you need to work with CSAC. Basically, you have to submit a new form to them where you create a list of all of the schools that you want. So it sounds like somebody at some point in the past set up an account for you just for your county schools, and you'll have to provide an updated form to them with, here are the other schools we want to add to our account, and then they can go ahead and add all of those additional schools to your account. And feel free to reach out to me directly if you want to talk one-on-one about the logistics of doing that. But yes, you should be able to get access to every single school that's in your county. You mentioned, so here's a question, you mentioned homeless youth. Are these numbers going to be counted as well? So no, we are not doing a FAFSA challenge for homeless youth. The FAFSA challenge is limited to foster youth, but we are doing other work around supporting homeless youth to be successful in college. And so we're doing a separate webinar because the issues are somewhat different for homeless youth than they are for foster youth, although there's a lot of overlap. If you listen to both of them, you'll be getting a lot of repeat information. So the homeless youth are not part of the FAFSA challenge, but I wanted you all to just know about the webinar because I know some of you also work with homeless youth or might want to forward that information along to colleagues who might want to participate in that webinar. So here's another question. Do we count foster youth that have been placed out of county but still under our jurisdiction? So I'm not sure if you mean that they're still under the jurisdiction of your county office of education or if they're still under the jurisdiction of your county child welfare agency. What you're counting are the students that are attending school in your county. So if they're, let's say you're in Orange County and they were under the jurisdiction of Orange County Child Welfare and then they got transferred over to LA and now that they're under the jurisdiction of LA County Child Welfare, you wouldn't include them in your count anymore if they transitioned in less than 30 days. Now, as I talked about before, if they were in your county for more than 30 days, then you do go ahead and include them in your count, understanding that they might end up also included in LA County's count. You know, we know that there could be duplication, but you do include them. Actually, I'm realizing I'm kind of reversing this question here. So you're saying if they're still under your jurisdiction, so you're in Orange County, they're still under Orange County's jurisdiction, but they're going to school in Ventura, you most likely would not include them because presumably they're no longer on your 5.7 list. They're coming up on the 5.7 list of Ventura County where they're now attending school. So feel free to write in if I didn't answer that question, if that wasn't what you meant, or contact me directly. So here's another question. To be clear, only the percentage rate of FAFSAs need to be reported, not the WebGrant account, CHAFE, or GPA. Correct. We are not asking you to report on the WebGrant account, CHAFE, or GPA. We put that on the form because, you know, we think it's a valuable thing for you to track for your own purposes and for, you know, to make sure students are getting all their financial aid. But we are not asking you to report that. We know that it's not an easy thing for you to track down whether or not every student did a CHAFE application and opened a WebGrants account. So, you know, until we're able to provide you with an easy way for knowing that information, we're not going to be asking you to report that to us. So I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. So I just want to say one last thing, which is that last year's challenge we feel like was just a remarkable success. We were so thrilled with how this rolled out. It was the first year doing it, and yeah, we really didn't know what to expect, and we had such a wonderful experience and felt like it was so valuable for the students, and we're really, really excited to do it again this year. You know, we hope that we've learned some things from the first year that will make it even better this year. We hope that everybody who participated last year will choose to do so again. We hope that if there are any of you on the call that didn't participate last year that want to do it this year, that you will. And actually just got a question about that. You didn't participate last year, but you had registered yet. You absolutely. Every single county, all 58 counties can participate this year regardless of what you did last year. And we really hope that you will. You know, again, it's just, cannot understate the importance of making sure this financial aid is in place if these students are going to have any chance of being successful once they get to college. So we're so grateful to all of you for the work that you're doing on this. You are obviously the people that are out there day to day doing this work, and we really, really appreciate it. I did just get one last kind of technical question, so I'll go ahead and answer it before I close. Does the 30 days for a student include total count of days? For example, if they were enrolled for 20 days one time and come back for 15 days? Oh, that's an interesting question. I have to admit, I haven't even thought about that scenario. So I will answer off the fly and say yes, go ahead and count them. Understanding that, I haven't talked with Kathy about that scenario in Foster Focus. So Kathy, you and I can maybe kind of touch base about how that might be accounted for in Foster Focus. It's a really good question, but it hadn't crossed my mind. So let me kind of, off the cuff, I'd say, yeah, probably so. But you know what, let me kind of mull that question over and see what makes sense logistically. And we'll send out some follow-up information and update our policies. So thank you for raising that issue that we didn't even think about. So I think that's it. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. So again, thank you so much. Watch your email. We're going to be sending you the link to sign up. We're giving you, I think, till November 15th to sign up is the deadline, but we really, really hope that you sign up sooner than that because the FAFSA does open October 1st, and the sooner you sign up, then the fewer emails you'll get from us bothering you about why you haven't signed up yet. So it's really easy to do, so we encourage you to go ahead and do it as soon as possible. So thank you again to Carolyn, thank you again to Kathy, thank you again to everybody who is on the webinar today, and that ends this morning webinar.